All right, I think with that, we'll get rolling here. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our March webinar here at SFEC. I'm Lane Mosier. I'm a forester with the Sustainable Forest Education Cooperative, working alongside Eli Sagor, who will be closing us out of today's webinar. And today we have a presentation from Rachel Dube, who's a forest health specialist with the Minnesota DNR, kind of expanding on the forest health update we got last month from Eric Otto, also on the forest health team, specifically looking at oak decline and what to do about it. So with that, Rachel, take us away.
Yeah, thanks very much, Lane. And thank you everyone for being here today and having interest in oak health issues. And I know it's been a big topic of discussion in the forest health world. I mean, it always is, but especially in the past few years. So I'm really happy to provide an update on it and share some resources for you. So there's a broad overview of what I'll be talking about today. I'm going to talk quickly about our oak resource, of course, oak decline and other recent oak health issues, recommendations for both stress yard trees and stress oak forests, provide a washout for oak wilt, of course, and then we'll wrap up with some resources for oak health ID as well as assistance. And so kind of here, why we're here today, why we care about this. This will be information that some of you are well aware of, but if you're not, oak is considered an ecological keystone genus, and it's predicted to do well in Minnesota's future climate. So it's a really good tree to plant for a variety of issues, a host of wildlife benefits as well. Oaks are in the 2 of the 5 most abundant tree species in Minnesota that are greater than 12 inches at diameter breast height. Number 2 is bur oak, and number 5 is our northern red oak. And then oaks are 2 of the 3 most abundant tree species in Minnesota that are over 17 inches DBH. Number 1 is bur oak, and number 3 is red oak. So we have a lot of large oak trees here in Minnesota. And on the timber industry side, it's our number 1 hardwood harvested and utilized by sawlog mills. It's our number 1 sawlog export, and it's our number 1 residential fuel wood source. I'm sure a lot of you that burn wood did not have to burn as much oak this year than as compared to other years in the past, but I consider that kind of a nice break this year, for us at least. And then this is another piece of information. If you work in natural resources, this is a review for you, but if you're not aware, we have 7 species of oak here in Minnesota. Here are their species ranges, and here in the bottom right, we have chinkapin oak, which is kind of an added feature that is only native to Houston County, but northern red, pin oak, bur oak, and white oak are our most common oak species. And we do break these down into 2 different groups, and this will actually come up later when I talk about oak wilt. We have our red oak group as well as our white oak group. The easiest way to tell them apart is to look at the leaves. You see here on the top in the red oak group, they have these pointed leaf lobes. And then the bottom picture here in the white oak group, they have rounded leaf lobes. The acorns can also help as well, but there can be some more variation here. Kind of a general rule of thumb is that red oak group acorns are a little bit more short and squat, whereas white oak group acorns tend to be more long and slender in shape. So something to look out for if you're wondering what sort of oak species you're working with. And this is a breakdown of our oak resource in Minnesota by acres, age, and ownership classes. And so kind of the first thing that might jump out to you if you're looking at this red bar that greatly exceeds everything else, you can see that the majority of our oaks in Minnesota are on private land. And another thing that might jump out to you looking at this age distribution is that we do have a number of older oaks here in Minnesota. I've heard it characterized as being, quote, late middle aged oak trees, and that will definitely play a role in my talk today, as some of these older oak trees can be more susceptible to tree health issues. just like us, unfortunately, trees, or maybe fortunately, trees don't live forever, and they can be just more susceptible as they get up there in age. And so we'll provide here our overview of oak decline and some other recent oak health issues. And so there were really widespread oak health issues in 2023. It was, in fact, our most widespread tree health issue were these declining oak trees. And we saw increased levels of oak mortality really becoming more noticeable back in 2022, but they were even more abundant in 2023. And we believe that this was in large part incited by the exceptionally dry conditions in 2021 and then in 2023 in many parts of the state. And after that drought, the subsequent increase in opportunistic pests and pathogens. And we did see a number of declining oak stands. And in these declining stands, dieback usually progresses over a number of years, even though the initial symptoms, unlike these trees here in the photos, may not be very noticeable. And the dieback refers to kind of a general and progressive dying back from the tips of the branches, so that outer canopy, starting at the twigs, then the shoots, then moving back to the branches. And this eventually leads to a slower death that can occur over several years. And the symptoms of decline include this general and progressive dieback, formation of chlorotic, small and sparse leaves, as well as epicormic shoots. These are shoots that are coming up on the main branches in the trunk as the outer canopy dies and more light gets into the inner portions of the tree. That's a sign of tree stress, and it's kind of heaving a last-ditch effort to stay alive. And then you might also see some premature fall color as well as leaf drop in these declining trees. And the number of declining oaks, as I've mentioned, we've been seeing it increasing across the landscape in recent years due to several factors. One, we do have a lot of trees that are predisposed to decline. Like I mentioned, we do have a number of older oak trees on the landscape. Some of our stands, especially on private land, may not be managed, and there's a possibility that there's some overcrowding and a lot of competition in these stands for limited resources. And then in urban environments, such as these oaks in the photo, you're dealing with a more disturbed environment and compacted soil that is more stressful to these trees. And as I've mentioned, and we'll talk about in a lot of detail today, we've had these fluctuating patterns of, yes, excessive precipitation, not just drought, but too much rain, fluctuating with drought, and sometimes you throw in defoliation there for some extra stress to these trees. And so this is just one example of these fluctuating precipitation extremes we've seen in recent years. These are trees from a site in northern Pine County, and this photo was taken in 2019, so I only go through there on the weather pattern record. But you can see here in the blue text, these are growing seasons with excessive precipitation, and then in the orange italicized text, these are years with not enough precipitation. And you're seeing a lot of these years are, record-breaking years, seventh wettest spring in 2014, 2018 was the ninth driest spring on record in this area. And so in this particular picture, there are actually a number of dying hardwood species, including red oak. So these fluctuating patterns have been quite stressful to a number of tree species. And here's some photos of dying oak trees our forest health team took last year. But you're hearing this term oak decline, and you're kind of wondering, what does that mean exactly? I'll kind of talk through how we define and think about decline in the forest health world. And so here is a nice description of oak decline that I like from a Forest Service oak decline leaflet. And it says it's the periodic occurrences of decline and death of oaks over widespread areas have been recorded since 1900. These outbreaks, variously named oak decline, oak dieback, or oak mortality, are caused by a complex interaction of environmental stresses and pests and given the name oak decline. And oak decline can sometimes lead to a what killed this tree, the chicken or the egg conversation when it comes to determining what exactly negatively influenced the health of that tree. A tool that I like to use for illustrative purposes is the decline spiral. It was developed by Dr. Paul Mannion, and I think it's a nice illustration for the concept of tree decline and generally how it happens to a tree. It's kind of oversimplified, but I think it's a good educational tool. And looking here, there's a lot of text, so don't pay too much attention to that, but you'll see that generally starting here on the outside of the spiral, there are a number of factors that can lead a tree vulnerable to stress. It moves into the middle and you can have some abiotic stress factors leading in now to this inner circle. You're getting some insect and disease issues, finally leading down to the death of that tree. And I like to think of it as one of these funny little coin funnels that you might have used in your childhood, right? You drop the coin in and it invariably spirals down to the inner portion of that funnel going down to make your donation. And it's not exactly what happens with oak decline, but I like to think of it this way because as that tree moves closer and closer to that inner circle, it gets harder for that tree to recover, and it's just more and more difficult for that tree to pull itself away from potentially dying. And so I think it's a nice way to think about it. And so because there's a lot of text and I want to kind of go through the spiral, I've kind of taken the spiral, no offense to the great Dr. Mannion, but I've turned it on its side and kind of created a sideways version of the decline spiral. So starting off here in the outer portion or the top of my kind of inverted triangle here, we have these predisposing factors. Like I mentioned, old tree age, poor soils, a stressful urban environment, or even a suppressed tree that is growing underneath the canopy of mature trees. Then here we have our next level. These are inciting factors, and they're often abiotic stress factors, such as what we've seen here in Minnesota in our oak trees, especially drought and flood damage. And then moving here to the inner spiral, we have these what are called contributing factors that can contribute to decline and death. They're often called secondary factors as well, and they can be opportunistic, wood-boring insects, and root diseases that can often tip the scale to tree death. And so what I wanted to start off with is talking about, because it really has been so important for the health of our oaks, are these inciting factors, which are both drought and flood damage in recent years. And so there's actually been a lot of years with excessive precipitation, even though we have been so dry in the past few years in a lot of parts of Minnesota. And so here's a series of statewide maps showing the growing season precipitation in each of these years. And so it's showing what we got from April through September each year in different parts of the state. And the colors on these maps represent the level of precipitation and how it ranks when we compare to all of our other records in our history in Minnesota, our recorded history going back to 1895. And so it kind of shows, quote, how loosely normal each of these years are for precipitation that year, how it compares to other years. And so the more red areas were more dry, and then getting into the blue and especially these pinky purple areas are more wet, relatively speaking, in those years. And so I've gone through and circled some of these, and everywhere in the circled portions, these are actually for these years in the 90th percentile or more for precipitation in the growing season, meaning that they're in the top 10% for average, for above average precipitation in those parts of the state. And you'll notice that, especially in central Minnesota, there were a number of areas that had consecutive or repeating years of above average and even excessive precipitation in some years. And then pulling out to the statewide level, some of these years had the most growing season rain in the number 12th place here in 2014. Number 7th wettest year statewide in 2016, and then 2019, especially in the early part of the year, was number 11. And that excessive precipitation can and does stress trees. But especially in recent years, we have had years with very significant drought in Minnesota. And these are the same series of maps. They're just highlighting areas that were more dry in recent years. And so kind of using the same concept and circling areas that were the most dry. Now, these are in the lowest 15% for growing season precipitation. You can see again in several areas, there are repeated years of drought, which really stress trees out. And then looking statewide, of course, we're very well aware that 2021 and 2023 were years of very significant drought in significant portions of the state. 2021 was the 11th driest year on record, and then 2023 was our 9th driest year, unfortunately for us and our oak trees. And taking a look back, this was the last map produced by the U.S. Drought Monitor in the 2023 growing season. And you can see here that there are extensive portions of the state that are in extreme and severe drought categories. Now, going and kind of taking a longer term look, this is another nice graphic that was provided by our state climatology office. And this shows longer term trends in our summer precipitation. And so this line going here in the middle shows the long-term summer precipitation average, again, using data from 1895 to 2023. If you tuned into my coworker, Eric Otto's recent Forest Health update, you might have seen this graphic, but the areas in blue and shaded blue above this average line indicate that the 5-year precipitation average for that time period was above the long-term average. And then flipping to the other side, these areas in maroon, it means that their 5-year precipitation pattern was below average. And you can see here in recent years, kind of starting in the 2020s, we moved into a 5-year below average, a drier term, dry long-term period that is. And comparing to the past, put a line here to compare. We reached this severity of a longer term dry period back in 2007. And before that, you had to go all the way back to 1938. And what this graph doesn't show is we are getting a little bit of an offset during the cool season. And this might be why you're maybe seeing on average for the state that we're not as dry as we might expect, because we are offsetting that. And to quote our state climatologist, Kenny Blumenfield, it's, quote, safe to say that the early 2020s have been the wettest dry period on record in Minnesota. So we're living in a really interesting time for precipitation, and I think we're certainly seeing it in our trees. And so generally speaking, these are some impacts we expect from again, this combination of flooding can lead to reduced photosynthesis. Again, as they're becoming stressed, their capacity to do this lessens. You're getting leaf death here. And this, of course, right, they're not able to produce enough energy for themselves, so their growth reduces. And this is not from Minnesota, this photo. This is something that was generously supplied by someone in the forest health program from the Missouri Department of Conservation. But this shows the growth rings on a pin oak from the state. And you can see here, right here, this annual ring is from about 2012 when they, similar to us, experienced a significant drought. And looking back at the preceding 10 years of ring growth, this is the space expand. So it grew that much in 10 years. But then after that drought, the tree was in decline for nearly a decade, and it only grew this much, really hardly putting on much growth each year at all. And then the tree did finally recently die. So growth essentially stopped and greatly slowed for years before this tree finally died. And so with this reduced growth, it really puts trees in a place where they aren't able to defend themselves very well. They do heavily rely on producing defense, chemical defense compounds, that is, to defend themselves from pests and pathogens. And they're really good at protecting themselves when they're not stressed. But when they are suffering from reduced photosynthesis due to flooding and drought, they really don't produce many of those defensive compounds anymore, unfortunately. And with oak decline, there is this often delayed symptom expression. In younger trees, you might see symptoms showing up sooner, but these big old trees, it can actually take, the following year following a stress event to 2 to 3 to even 5 years or more to start to show symptoms. So it can take a long time. And some of those more subtle ones, or the discolored leaves, eventually might start getting stunted leaves, leading to dieback from shoot death and root death. And eventually this can lead to mortality. And so if you're wondering if you are dealing with oak decline, you might want to take a look and see if other species are being affected by abiotic factors. Here's a picture here on the left. We've got a sugar maple here all the way on the left-hand side of this picture, a basswood in the middle, and then a red oak on the right. And they're all displaying really similar symptoms, and they're all dying together at the same time. And then on the right over here, we have photos from several species. This was back from summer 2021 when we were experiencing significant drought and a really hot June. We're actually getting a leaf scorch. So we have that happening on a basswood as well as a red oak, and then on a bur oak seedling here at the bottom. So you're seeing a number of tree species affected. And so going back to our decline spiral, dieback symptoms can result from the effects of stress alone, and very severe or prolonged stress can result in tree mortality. However, it's very common for secondary factors to attack stressed trees after these inciting factors and contribute to tree mortality, and sometimes lead to much more rapid tree mortality once they attack. And going through some of the really common ones on oaks, there are two in particular that are most common. Two-line chestnut borer is one. They attack stressed oak trees. They are opportunistic, and they are a wood-boring beetle. Their larvae create these galleries in the phloem and cambium of trees. That is the inner bark and the outer wood, and that slowly can girdle a tree over time. This is what their adult looks like. It's not to scale, but we did see a number of trees with obvious symptoms of two-line chestnut borer that died very quickly in recent years. And one of the classic symptoms of two-line chestnut borer you can look for is this canopy pattern. We call it dead red and green. It often takes a few growing seasons for trees to succumb from two-line chestnut borer attack. So you'll have these dead twigs and branches that have already been killed, red in the area where they are successfully launching their attack, moving from the top and the outsides in, finally down here in the green where we do still have healthy portions of the tree. And like I mentioned, we had them killing trees quite quickly in recent years. So sometimes the whole canopy would go red in just one growing season. But something that you do find with trees that are killed by two-lane chestnut borer is that they do hold their leaves for many weeks. So that is something you can look for in your woods or your tree to see if it's hanging on to those leaves. But we have seen elevated levels of two-line chestnut borer across the state in recent years, and so a lot of symptoms of it. And unfortunately, it is difficult to try to pick up this damage on our aerial forest health survey that we do annually, but per our on-the-ground observations and reports, we are seeing a lot of it. And then it can take trees many years to recover from two-length chestnut borer, even after, say, for example, for us now in Minnesota, get back to adequate levels of precipitation. Not only are the trees themselves slowly trying to recover from that drought stress, but you do have these elevated levels of two-length chestnut borer that will take a number of years to eventually die back down to previous levels. And often where you have two-line chestnut borer, you will also have armillaria root disease. It's really common in stressed oaks, but it's much harder to see than two-line chestnut borer. It is caused by a fungus, and they live on the stumps and roots of dead trees. But like two-line chestnut borer, are opportunistic and are attracted to stressed trees and can overcome the defenses of stressed trees and attack their roots. And you can see here, here's a fungal mat moving into the base of this tree, and this tree showing symptoms of armillaria root disease with that declining canopy, often those stunted leaves as well. And then the armillaria fungus will also produce these structures that are called rhizomores. It's also referred to shoestring rot, and that allows it to persist underneath the bark of dying and dead trees and move throughout the soil. So it's very common. It's just harder to see. And armillaria itself can be the sole killer of stressed trees. It's not always a combination of two-line chestnut borer and armillaria. So something to keep in mind when you're seeing dying oaks on the landscape. Of course, there are other opportunists out there that will more easily stress trees during droughts. Just a couple of examples of these on oaks are the Boxerspira twig canker, as well as Kermes scale insects here showing on a pin oak. So there can be a whole host of factors, again, that are leading the tree down this decline spiral. And unfortunately, when you have the combination of droughts and floods, it actually can be more severe to forests that are adjacent to water. A lot of us in the forest health world, especially when talking with private landowners, get the question, well, I'm next to a wetland, I'm next to a lake, is my tree going to be okay during a drought because of this? And so trees growing adjacent to wetlands often don't have as much rooting area as compared to those on upland sites. And so they can be more susceptible to stress from both flooding and drought. And this photo on the left was taken in summer 2019 after we had excessive precipitation in spring 2019. We saw this while doing our aerial surveys. There's a number of instances of dead and dying trees surrounding wetlands because they were flooded out. And again, right, we've had a number of years with this excessive precipitation followed by drought. So a lot of these wetland adjacent trees are stressed. And then with flooding stress itself, it can actually just physically suffocate and kill roots. And of course, right, roots are very important for the uptake of nutrients and waters that can lead to the death of shoots. And then prolonged flooding in soils can lead to the infection of roots by water molds. Here's a picture of one. They are not fungi, but Two common species are Phytophthora and Pythium, or two common genera, I should say. And we do think that this can be an important factor in tree mortality for oaks that are in flooded situations. And here's a picture of some seedlings that were killed by a water mold in the roots, and as well as some pictures that are dying in a flooded condition here, again, back in 2019. And we do think that flooding is a clear factor for some dying pockets of oak that we are seeing really across central Minnesota and northern Minnesota. So something to keep in mind as well. It's not just drought. And this is a lot of text, I know. So this is just a really quick summary that I'll go through, kind of sharing some ground observations. My coworker, Brian Schwingle, in the Forest Health Program, shared from his observations in central and southern Minnesota, going all the way from 2014 to 2023, just sharing what he believes are the causes for tree decline and mortality that he saw, with the major caveat is that identifying the cause of oak decline can be really challenging even for forest health specialists at times. So about a quarter of the cases, two-line chestnut borer was the most obvious contributing agent. Again, armillaria was likely present as well. It's just more difficult to see. And about 4% of the cases, armillaria was the most easily identified cause. You also have a disease here, Tubacia, that was associated with dieback on white oak. Only about 1% of the cases. We do get questions about it though, so it's likely not contributing to decline. And Phytophthora, I mentioned, right, that water mold was confirmed in a couple of cases and associated with some dieback. And we do think, like I mentioned, that it does contribute significantly to decline on wetter sites. And then in about 23% of the cases, abiotic factors were the most likely inciting factor with decline symptoms. 23% of the cases, there was no clearly identifiable contributing agent. So we just didn't know. And then 24 cases, there's no contributing agent nor inciting factor. So it's really hard to know what happened in those cases. And so if you are dealing with oak decline, unhealthy oaks in yard situations, or you're a person that receives questions from concerned landowners, here are some kind of general recommendations that you can either use or provide. So one, I'd like to tell landowners to, especially when we're in periods of abiotic stress or periods after abiotic stress, is to try to pay attention to your trees to look for new symptoms. So this tree on the left here is showing really early onset symptoms of two-line chestnut borer attack, and starting in the upper and outer portions of the canopy. And then you have this tree here to the right that is showing more moderate symptoms. So if you can catch this right away, all the better. Reducing tree stress is your number one prerogative in trying to keep your yard trees healthy. And I think most importantly here is to irrigate trees during droughts to try to minimize that drought stress. We do have some, I think, great how to water tree we have this one video as well as some other resources on the Minnesota DNR website for younger trees. And then for larger trees here, I have a photo here of this soaker hose. Oftentimes, it's most realistic for people to identify 1 to 2 most valuable trees. It can be kind of a project to stay on top of these trees. I even found that for myself last year because we were so dry. You kind of had to keep on top of it. It's probably just not realistic for people to do more than that. Plus, you're using up quite a bit of water as well. And this really is probably the best method to prevent two-line chestnut borer attack. And we have more information on, again, how to water mature trees on our website using a soaker hose under the drip line for several hours when we are dry. Something that we do get questions about is fertilizing stressed trees, and we really do recommend actually against that if your tree is stressed or recovering from stress, unless you actually get a soil test and determine that there is a known nutrient deficiency. A lot of fertilizers promote above ground growth rather than root growth, and that can overwhelm those stressed roots. So you want to make sure that if you are fertilizing, you are trying to really specialize and address a real nutrient deficiency. Most of our trees are shown to not have nutrient deficiencies. You want to, oaks are actually especially susceptible to, are especially stressed by adding soil over the roots. So you want to try to avoid that during stress periods, as well as trying to avoid driving over tree roots and limiting soil disturbance and compaction. Mulching is helpful if you're able to do it, especially for those younger trees. We have how to properly mulch, because improperly mulching can actually lead to more problems. You don't want to create the dreaded mulch volcano that it's piled high right next to that tree trunk. You can add too much mulch, and putting it right next to the base of this tree can promote rot. So there's a nice kind of, it's called the 3x3x3 rule that you can find more information on our website. And at this time, you might want to consider holding off pruning your yard trees, again, because trees that are stressed are just less capable of producing defense compounds against decay fungi and other things that might invade that new wound, and they're going to have a harder time quickly healing over those wounds as well. So if you can wait, it is advised. We do also get a lot of questions about using insecticides for trees that are attacked by two-line chestnut borer. It can help in certain cases. They are quite expensive. So again, this is most likely going to be something that most people will use for a very valuable yard tree. But again, prevention is really going to be your best strategy in this case, but there are insecticides that you can apply, or you can contact a professional to apply. But a really important caveat is that you do not want to pick a highly valuable tree that is showing 40 to 50% mortality in its canopy. You want to catch it before that, for that insecticide to have any chance of being successful. For example, this tree here on the left is not a good candidate for insecticides. And while the insecticides can kill two-line chestnut borer, it will do absolutely nothing against this armillaria root disease that is likely to be in this tree at the same time, nor will it do anything to address what is causing stress to the tree and allowing two-line chestnut borer to overwhelm the tree's defenses. So something to keep in mind, it's not always the best idea for every situation. And then we do have more limited options for stressed forests, but a lot of it is going to go again towards prevention. So if you are a private landowner, you might consider delaying thinning your forest for a couple of years after drought ends to allow those trees to recover. But in the long term, thinning overly crowded oak forests during these stress-free years, again, you'd want to work with a professional to do this, is really going to be one of your best defenses for your trees to be more resilient against future stress events. So you want to focus on really trying to rejuvenate your forest, taking out unhealthy trees, and diversifying with trees that are well suited to the site that you have. So it's really kind of a more of a long-term strategy with our stressed forests. This is something to just be on the lookout for, is oak wilt if you are seeing unhealthy oak trees. So oak wilt is a deadly disease that affects all oaks in Minnesota. It's caused by an invasive fungus. And I know I'm going just really quickly. I could do a whole presentation on oak wilt, but it is A bigger problem, or at least kills tree much more quickly in our red oak group. Again, those oak trees with pointed leaf lobes, but it can and does kill bur oaks. White oaks are our least susceptible species to oak wilt, but they can also die from it as well. This is a map, it's on our DNR website, showing where oak wilt is common in the darker shaded areas. And then this is the area in the lighter shaded areas where oaks are at significant risk of developing oak wilt, but it can show up anywhere at any time because it can move on oak firewood. So it's something for all of us to be on the lookout for. Many different oak health issues can be confused with oak wilt, especially on our white oaks. But two-line chestnut borer is most commonly confused with oak wilt. Here are two trees that are directly adjacent to each other. The tree on the left has oak wilt, the tree on the right has two-line chestnut borer. And drought can make this much more difficult. You have some trees that are dying very quickly from two-line chestnut borer, and it can make looking for the symptoms of oak wilt more difficult. But to just show you a quick comparison, of trees dealing with different issues. Here on the left, we have oak wilt, in the middle, two-line chestnut borer, and on the right, bur oak blight. So something to look out for oak wilt is the rapid drop of vast majority of the tree's leaves. And again, this is on red oaks. White oaks, you'll want to get testing. But looking here, you'll see a carpet of leaves underneath these trees, oftentimes in the middle of summer. So that's going to clue you in that you might have oak wilt. With two-line chestnut borer, like I mentioned before, you have the classic dead red and green, or at least you have these dead red leaves hanging on for several weeks, up to months at a time. And then with bur oak blight, what's different about it is that you can often see a cap of green leaves at the top. This is caused by a fungus that invades the leaves, and it moves from the bottom of the tree and the inside out. So you'll often see healthy leaves on the upper and outer portions compared to oak wilt that moves from the top down and the outside in. So like I mentioned, you do often want to test for oak wilt, especially if you have a white or a bur oak. Forest health specialists aren't able to identify it visually oftentimes. So you want to make sure that you do it. And I have heard of a number of instances where hopefully well-intentioned folks, arborists, are telling folks that they have oak wilt and taking action before getting testing done. Make sure you get your tree tested before you take any steps to manage for oak wilt on private property. And then we do want you to report oak wilt to us outside of the dark shaded zone. You can do that through the Great Lakes Early Detection Network app, or by submitting a EDD maps report or reporting to your local forestry office. And then, like I mentioned, this is our last section. I wanted to share some resources for you for identifying oak health issues, as well as where to seek assistance if you need some. This is a great website from University of Extension. Thank you, University Extension, for the great products you put out. This is the What's Wrong with My Plant tool. You can search through, pick out your tree. You want to select oak here, and then you can go through symptom by symptom and try to determine what you're dealing with. You can also take a look at our forest health website. We do have pages on oak wilt and two-line chestnut borer. We're also hoping to put up an oak decline page in the future. And then we do have some, I think, really great brochures on oak wilt, and then how to determine if you're dealing with two-line chestnut borer versus oak wilt. And then this is a nice product from the U.S. Forest Service that goes and shows quite a bit of different oak health issues that you might see. Just wanted to reiterate that you can submit samples for a cost from the University of Minnesota Plant Disease Clinic, including getting oak wilt testing done. And then for private land, the forest health team can be a contact. We do tend to deal more with large scale forest tree sickness or death that's larger than 1 contiguous acre or more scattered damage occurring over 10 acres or more. And then if you do want some forest management assistance, you can contact your local DNR stewardship forester. This map on the right is on our DNR website. For yard trees, you can contact the University of Minnesota Forest Resources Outreach line. You might also work with your city to see if they have a city tree inspector. You could also contact a local Minnesota tree care advisor or ask a master gardener. And then finally here, you could also, again, for those yard trees, hire an ISA certified arborist. That's the International Society of Arboriculture. You can use this website to find a local arborist. We do suggest that you try to get at least 2 quotes from arborists if at all possible. And again, getting that laboratory confirmation prior to doing any management for oak wilt. And with that, thank you so much for joining me today to learn about oak health, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Rachel, that was awesome. Thank you for the presentation. Lane started us off, but he needs to check out here for another event immediately at the top of the hour. So I told him I'd handle Q&A. And we have a few here. The first one is a short one. Can trees heal over damage caused from boring insects?
Yeah, so you will see in a number of trees, I've actually noticed this going out, especially looking out for trees infected by oak wilt, right? I'm looking underneath the bark to see, you will often see 2-line chestnut borer galleries in those trees, and they do appear to be perfectly healthy. It is a possibility that those trees might be in a state of earlier decline, but like I mentioned, once trees are on that decline spiral, again, maybe if they're a younger tree, they're growing on, a higher site index site, they might be able to bounce back and recover. And what you'll see with 2-line chestnut borer is that they start their attack in the upper portions of the canopy. So you'll often see trees with, one branch flagging, that's some attack happening in those upper branches, but then you'll sometimes see those trees, their defenses kicked in, and they were able to stop that attack.
Awesome. Thanks, Rachel. Okay, next question. What are some recommended trees to plant when oaks have died? And I'm wondering if we should combine these. I think I will. There's another one here. To what extent are trees regenerating within these gaps created by armillaria? You talked obviously a fair bit about armillaria. Are they typically young and vigorous enough to withstand the pressure from diseased roots? So armillaria is everywhere. If it has just killed some mature trees and it's really flaring in that area, or it's all over, does it make sense to plant other vulnerable trees into it, or will naturally regenerating trees be able to grow through that? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Let's start off with armillaria. So right, we describe armillaria as being a, quote, disease of the site, right? Once it's there in those soils, there's really no way of getting rid of it. And so our main management strategy, right, is in 3 words: increase tree vigor. So if you have healthy oak trees at that site, they are less attractive to armillaria, even if it's there and present, and it's less likely to be able to successfully colonize those tree roots. So it's not a done deal. If armillaria is at the site, you can still see oaks growing. On some sites, you can see more significant armillaria infestation and more significant mortality. One strategy you could use in that situation is to interplant conifers, next to those oak stumps that have died from armillaria, right? Because there's a whole bunch of different species of armillaria, and the ones that attack the oaks are less likely to attack those conifers. So there are different strategies, and I know that there are major problems out in the landscape with regenerating oak. I know that the DNR, I think it's supposed to be later this year, is going to be publishing a big study that they've done, kind of like a pilot study looking at how to promote oak regeneration on the landscape. So I suggest that people definitely take a look at that and see kind of what they're finding, you know, what's contributing to that and what we can do to try to combat that and regenerate oaks on the landscape. But if you are experiencing oak mortality on your property, I would say that oaks are definitely still a really great species to plant. I did focus on them here and now, but there are still plenty of healthy oaks still out on the landscape. Many of them are still doing well and will continue to do well. So I don't want people to shy away from oaks, but we really are, you know, kind of in this new world of invasive species, climate change. Really diversifying your forest is a really great strategy to take to make your forest more resilient and better able to adapt to all these changes coming our way, right? And one of those invasive species is, of course, oak wool. And I get people asking, should I plant red oak? Should I plant white oak? Yeah, we actually do still recommend it. You might want to plant it differently. You might not plant, you know, a smattering of oaks right next to each other that might pass oak wool on to one another. You might want to interplant oak. And if you're looking at what species to plant, I would say take a look around, see what else is growing around you and is well adapted to your site and is successful there. And if you are a private landowner, I suggest working with a professional to get some specific recommendations for your land.
Awesome. Thanks again, Rachel. Tyler Masseth says, thanks for all the great information. As far as thinning dead trees, I guess removing dead trees, is it important to remove them entirely and dispose of them, or is lop and scatter sufficient?
Yeah, so with two-line chestnut borer, right, it can stay with those declining and dead trees that are left, you know, until the next year when the adults will reemerge in the spring. So we do have some more information about, you know, salvaging in forests that have elevated levels of two-line chestnut borer mortality. So you can see some specific strategies there. Go to our two-line chestnut borer webpage. We have a management link on the left side. But with that and with yard trees, removing and destroying that material can help to locally reduce those populations. But I will say is that two-line chestnut borer is a native insect. And so if its populations are high, you know, in that area, they're likely high across the landscape. So there's only so much you can do, but it can help to prevent them from just hopping into adjacent trees. So it's something that we don't say you have to do, but it can help.
Okay, great. We're at 9:54. I'll just pause for a moment. We do have a few other questions here that we'll get to, but I have just posted the CE credit link. I guess I'll hit enter here and post it a second time. I'll also draw folks' attention to the chat where I've just shared some information. Our next month's webinar is with Charlie Blinn and David Wilson. They're going to be talking about forest management guideline monitoring highlights and erosion control methods. And I'm surprised at this, but I wonder if we haven't promoted it hard enough. We have 2 days of field-based forest management guidelines workshops coming up in mid-May. It's going to be beautiful out there, no bugs. I can't promise that, but I hope. And those are in the Grand Rapids area. It's been years since we've offered these. We did one of those FMG field days last fall. But I encourage folks to check those out. Again, links to both of those are in the chat, along with the continuing ed credit request link. Next question for you, Rachel. Excellent presentation. Is it too early to start watering declining oak trees now? Let's just do that one first, and then we'll get to another question about watering.
Yeah, I would say to check your soils to see if they're still frozen. I would assist part-time at our state forest nursery, which is outside of the Akeley area in Hubbard County. And I know that we've still got a good, kind of inch and a half crust or so at the top. And then I think we got our soil probe, maybe down about 5 inches or so when I was there this week. So if you have frozen soil, watering those trees, it isn't going to be worth it. They're really not going to be able to properly take it up. But I will say, because we are coming off of this drought in 2023, the sooner you can start watering, the better. Our general recommendation for watering trees is to do it if you can when we receive less than an inch of rain on average in a week. So if we're getting that from rain, there's really no need to water. Your tree has gotten adequate precipitation that way. And then you do want to check and make sure that you're deeply watering that tree, getting the soil, down to 6 to 8 inches in depth wet. So oftentimes you'll want to, leave that soaker hose on for an hour to several hours at a time to make sure you get that good deep soaking that trees prefer. And I'm totally stealing this again from my coworker Brian Schwingle from a recent presentation he gave. So when you're considering, what to do in drought, he said if it's me, and it's the same case for me too. If you're using a lot of water to, keep your landscape looking beautiful, I would prioritize your 200-year-old bur oak versus your grass. It's sad to lose the grass, but it's much more easy to get that back versus that large oak that will take several generations of people to get a tree back to that size.
Great. This next, you must have anticipated or maybe read the next question. Assuming proper irrigation. So this next question is about a 24-inch bur oak yard tree that lost about 30% of its leaves last summer. Assuming proper irrigation, what's the chance that that tree will recover? So if you water it, it lost 30% of its leaves last summer, big 24-inch bur oak. What do you think?
That is sad. I'm sorry to hear that. So that tree to me is really kind of on the precipice, and it is far into its decline. We do say kind of when you're getting to that percentage lossage to 50%, it's a matter of time. But if I were, the owner of that tree and it already had lost that much, if you haven't been watering previously, your chances of being able to recover it are even more slim. I would probably give it a try unless there are other healthy oak trees that you do want to focus your efforts on. So I always say kind of with, these yard trees, they are individually so valuable. It's worth a try, but remember, it's very likely that it doesn't need to be fertilized. And if you wanted to make the investment in injecting it for two-line chestnut borer, it's right on that edge. So think about it if that's a worthwhile investment to you or not.
Okay, and Rachel, we do have one more question, but I'm afraid I need to close things out right now because Lane's telling me that we have this other SFEC event that he can't start because he created this Zoom meeting and he can't do it this time. So thank you so much. This was really a great presentation. As always, we really are appreciative of the Forest Health team's willingness to get content out this way. Thanks to everyone who came. Great turnout. We're really pleased with the turnout we've had for this year's webinars. If you do want continuing ed credits, look for the link in the chat. And please join us next month. It's going to be great, kind of an interactive session with David Wilson and Charlie Blinn talking about forest management guidelines, as well as I said, those two field-based FMG workshops in May. Again, all that info is in the chat or on the SFEC website. Rachel, thank you again. Great to see you and appreciate the presentation.
Yeah, thank you very much, Eli. Thanks for everyone for coming here today.
Bye, everybody.